guys, thanks for stopping by. Welcome to ASMR. Let's find a quiet spot, get your headphones in, and together we'll dive into a world of whispers and chills. I'd never noticed the van before. It was white, plain, with no logo. Just an old, slightly rusted vehicle parked across the street from my building. The kind of van you'd walk right past without a second glance. But one morning, as I was heading out to work, I saw it. The driver's window was rolled down just a crack, and there was a man sitting behind the wheel. He was staring at me. I paused, my keys halfway to the car door. He didn't look away, just kept watching me, his eyes dark. I tried to play it off, gave him a quick nod. He didn't respond, just kept staring. I got in my car and drove away, but the image stuck with me all day. The man's blank face, the way his hands rested perfectly still on the steering wheel. When I got home that evening, the van was still there, same spot, same man inside. This time, the window was rolled up. The van was dark, the interior barely visible through the tinted glass. I could just make out the shape of him, sitting perfectly still. I tried not to look at him as I walked inside, tried to convince myself he was just some delivery guy, or someone waiting for a friend. But he didn't leave. The next morning, the van was still there, and the morning after that, and the one after that. By the end of the week, I was starting to feel paranoid. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel him watching me. My neighbour, Mrs. Hoffman, was out watering her plants one afternoon, so I asked her if she'd noticed the van. She squinted across the street, then shook her head. Van? I haven't seen any van. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing from window to window, peeking through the blinds. The van was still there, parked under the streetlight. The driver's side window was down again, and I could see him sitting there, still, watching. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, dialed the non-emergency line, and told them about the van. They said they'd send someone to check it out. 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. The officer got out, walked over to the van, and knocked on the window. The man didn't move. The officer knocked again, then said something I couldn't hear. Still no response. Finally, he pulled out his flashlight and shone it through the window. Then he stepped back, his hand on his radio. I pressed my forehead against the glass, straining to see. The officer was talking into his radio now, his eyes locked on the van. A few minutes later, a second patrol car pulled up, then a third. 3 officers approached the van, 2 on one side, 1 on the other. They pulled open the door. The man inside didn't move. They dragged him out and laid him on the ground. That's when I saw it. The man wasn't just sitting still. He was strapped to the seat. His wrists bound to the armrests with duct tape, his ankles taped to the floor, his head lowered to the side, eyes open and glassy. One of the officers leaned down, checking his pulse. He shook his head. Dead. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. The van was towed away, the street emptied, and by morning everything looked normal again. I tried to forget about it, told myself it was a one-off, some bizarre incident that had nothing to do with me. But a few nights later, I woke up to a sound outside my window, a low, rhythmic beeping. I got up and peered through the blinds. A van was parked across the street, same spot, same model, but this one was black, and there was someone inside. A man in the driver's seat, his face hidden in shadow, just barely visible behind the glass. His head was tilted slightly toward my apartment, as if he was looking right at me. I pulled the blind shut and backed away, my hands shaking. I told myself it was just a coincidence. The first van was white, this one was black. It wasn't the same guy. It couldn't be. But the next morning, the van was still there, and the morning after that. Every time I walked outside, I could feel him watching me, not moving, not blinking, just waiting. I called the cops again, but by the time they arrived, the van was gone. 3 nights later, I was in bed, drifting off to sleep when I heard it again, that same low, rhythmic beeping. I got up, crept to the window and peered through the blinds. The black van was there, but this time it was closer, parked right in front of my building, and this time the driver's side window was down. I couldn't see inside, just the faint glow of a red light pulsing from the dashboard. Then the light blinked off. That's when I saw it, a shape moving toward my building. A man dragging something behind him. A long black bag that slumped against the pavement, leaving a dark, wet streak in its wake. I just watched as he approached my door, his head still down, his shoulders slumped. Then he stopped and looked up at my window. His face was blank, pale, expressionless, but his eyes were dark and empty, just staring straight through me. Then he smiled, and in his hand, dangling from one finger, was a strip of duct tape. I work nights, so I get home around 2 a.m. It's a quiet building, mostly older folks and a few college kids. The kind of place where you see the same faces every day, but don't know anyone's name. Just polite nods in the hallway and brief conversations in the laundry room. I usually take the elevator up to the 5th floor. It's slow, old, the kind with the scratched up mirror and the heavy metal doors that take forever to close. That night, the elevator felt different. I stepped inside, hit the button for the 5th floor, and leaned against the back wall, rubbing my eyes. I was exhausted. All I wanted was a hot shower and sleep. But as the doors were sliding shut, someone slipped in. A man. He was tall, thin, with a gaunt, hollow face. He wore a wrinkled, oversized hoodie, with the hood pulled up, and his hands were shoved deep into his pockets. I nodded at him, trying to be polite. He didn't nod back, just stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the buttons. I glanced down. None of the floor buttons were lit up. He hadn't pressed one. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. Maybe he was just riding up to the top floor. Maybe he lived there and didn't need to press the button because it was already selected. But I was the only one who'd pressed anything, and I'd pressed 5. The doors slid shut with a heavy clang, and we started to move. The man didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, his shoulders hunched, his hood casting a shadow over his eyes. I tried not to look at him, but it was impossible not to. There was something off about him. The way he stood, perfectly still. The way his hands stayed buried in those pockets. We passed the 2nd floor. The elevator groaned, shuddered a little. That's when he spoke. What floor? His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading off a script. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the unease. 5th, I said, same as what I pressed. He didn't say anything, just stared at me, his eyes dark and empty beneath the hood. Then he looked back at the buttons. We passed the 3rd floor. I could feel sweat beading on the back of my neck. The man leaned closer to the panel, his face inches from the buttons, staring at them like he'd never seen them before. You live on the 5th floor? He asked. His voice was low, almost a whisper. He leaned back, his hood slipping slightly to reveal a few strands of greasy hair. I thought you lived on the 2nd. A cold chill ran through me. I've seen you there, he said. Room 2B, right? I shook my head. No, I don't live there. You sure? He said. And for the first time he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. We passed the 4th floor. The elevator slowed, shuddered, and stopped. The doors slid open, revealing the dark, empty hallway. He didn't move, neither did I. "You know," he said, still staring at the open doors, "I could follow you." My heart was beating so quick, my legs felt like they were made of lead. "I could follow you all the way to your room," he said, "all the way inside." I swallowed, my throat dry. "I don't think so." His smile widened. "You don't think so?" He took a step closer. I could smell him now. Stale sweat, something rotten underneath. I forced myself to look straight ahead at the open hallway. I couldn't see a single door open, not a single light on. "Or maybe," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "maybe I'm already there." I stepped forward, reaching for the door frame, ready to run, but just as I did, the doors slid shut. The elevator jerked and started moving again, up to the 5th floor. I stayed perfectly still, not daring to look at him. I could feel him watching me, the awful smile still stretching his face. When the doors finally opened, I bolted. I didn't look back, didn't wait for him to move, just sprinted down the hall to my door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. When I finally shoved the door open and slammed it behind me, I sank to the floor, my back against the door, chest heaving. I stayed like that for hours, listening, waiting. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing, just some creep trying to mess with me. Maybe he was high, maybe he was just messing around. But then, a few nights later, it happened again. I was coming home late, stepping into the elevator, and as the doors started to close, a hand shot out and stopped them. A man stepped inside, tall and thin, hood pulled over his face. This time, he didn't say a word, just stood there, staring at the floor buttons. I pressed 5, and so did he. I'd been to the cabin before. My uncle owned it, a small, creaky place, way out in the woods. No electricity, no running water, just a single room with a cot, a wood stove, and a single window that looked out into the trees. I hadn't been back in years, not since I was a kid. But after my uncle passed, the place just sat empty. I decided to go up for a weekend, clear it out, see if there was anything worth keeping. The drive up was long and winding, the road narrowing to a single dirt track that seemed to disappear into the trees. By the time I got there, the sun was dipping behind the pines, stretching the shadows long and thin. The cabin was exactly how I remembered it, dark, musty, and dead silent. The woods around it were so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. I went inside, dropped my bag, and started sorting through my uncle's things. There wasn't much, just a few blankets, some old tools, a couple of faded hunting magazines. Then I noticed the closet. It was the only closed door in the place, just a narrow, splintered thing with a rusty padlock hanging from the handle. I didn't remember it being there. I tried to open it, but the lock was rusted shut. I'd deal with it in the morning. That night, the woods felt quiet. I'd expected the usual noises, crickets, wind, the occasional rustle of a branch, but there was nothing, just this heavy, pressing silence that seemed to wrap itself around the cabin. I tried to sleep, but kept waking up to a sound, a low, steady creaking. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate, like footsteps moving back and forth on the wooden porch. I got up, crept to the window, and peered out. Nothing, just the black mass of the trees, branches shifting in the breeze. Then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the woods. It was barely visible, half hidden in the shadows, but I could make out the shape. Tall, thin, shoulders slumped forward. It was facing the cabin, facing me. I blinked. When I looked again, it was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, I went back to the closet. I wanted it open. I found a hammer in the shed and started banging at the lock until it broke. The door swung open and a cold, musty smell spilled out. Inside, it was dark, but I could make out that on the wall, carved into the wood, were dozens of symbols, scratched deep, overlapping each other, some so old, they were just faint grooves. They didn't look like writing, just random lines and shapes, jagged and chaotic. But in the centre of it all was a single phrase, gouged deep enough to splinter the wood. He waits in the trees. I stared at it, the hair on the back of my neck prickled. Then I heard it again, that creaking sound, slow, deliberate, right outside the cabin. I went to the window and looked out. The figure was closer now, standing just beyond the porch steps, still too far away to make out his face, but close enough to see the way it was swaying back and forth, like it was rocking on its heels. I opened the door, stepped outside. "Hello," I called. No answer. I took a step closer. The figure was gone. That night, I barricaded the door with a chair, kept the hammer next to the cot. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear that creaking sound. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke up to the sound of the front door opening. Not creaking, not slamming, just the soft click of the latch, like someone had quietly let themselves in. I sat up. There was a figure standing in the doorway, tall, thin, swaying. I couldn't see its face, just the shape of it, a dark silhouette against the night. It stepped forward, and the floorboards groaned beneath its feet. I grabbed the hammer and scrambled to my feet. Get out. It didn't move, just kept swaying back and forth, its arms hanging at its sides. Then it spoke, a low, wet voice, like someone trying to speak through a mouthful of mud. "You can't see me." I blinked. It took another step forward, and the air in the room grew heavy, colder. "You can't see me," it repeated. I took a step back, my heel hitting the wall. "Leave." His head twitched, then it leaned forward, closer, and I saw its eyes. Dark sunken pits that seemed to go on forever, and inside them, something moved. I squeezed my eyes shut and swung the hammer blindly. The air felt empty. When I opened my eyes, the room was empty. The door was still closed. The chair was propped against it. I was alone, but the closet door was open. The chair was facing me now, and on the wall there was something new. A fresh carving, the wood still raw and splintered. "You can't see me, but I can see you." I left the cabin and drove for hours without looking back. The next day, I called my cousin and told him to burn the place down. He didn't ask why. I didn't hear from him for weeks. Then, last night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognise. It was a picture, a photo of the cabin, still standing, and in the window, behind the glass, was a shadow, tall and thin. I'd been on the road for hours. It was late, around 1 a.m, and I was exhausted. There was was a diner up ahead, the kind that's open all night, with a flickering neon sign that said 24-hour grill. It looked empty. Inside, the place was dead. Just the waitress behind the counter, leaning on her elbow and watching some old crime show on the tiny TV above the grill. The place smelled like burnt coffee and stale grease. I slid into a booth near the back, as far from the window as possible. The waitress didn't look up. I ordered coffee and a grilled cheese. She brought it without a word and went back to watching the TV. That's when I noticed him. There was a man sitting at the counter, hunched over a plate of untouched food. He was facing away from me, his back straight and stiff, his arms resting perfectly still on either side of the plate. I hadn't noticed him when I walked in. His clothes were too big for him, a heavy jacket despite the heat, with the hood pulled up. I couldn't see his face, just the back of his head, and the way his shoulders seemed to rise and fall with each slow, heavy breath. Something about the way he was sitting felt wrong, too rigid, too controlled, like he was waiting for something. I tried to focus on my food, but every time I glanced up, he was still there, still staring down at his untouched plate, still breathing that same slow, deliberate way. The waitress must have noticed me looking because she said, "Don't worry about him." I swallowed. He'd been here a while. Her eyes flicked to the TV, since before my shift started. How long ago was that? She didn't answer. I forced myself to take a bite of my sandwich, but my stomach was too tight to eat. The man hadn't moved, not an inch. I kept waiting for him to pick up his fork, or adjust his posture, or do anything to break the stillness. But he didn't, just sat there, staring straight down. The place was too quiet, just the low buzz of the TV and the ticking of the wall clock. That's when he spoke, without turning around, without moving a muscle. "Are you scared of me?" His voice was low, raspy, like someone who hadn't spoken in hours. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too busy trying to convince myself that he wasn't talking to me. The waitress didn't react, didn't look at me, didn't look at him. Just stared at the TV, her jaw clenched tight. The man spoke again, louder this time. "You should be." Then, very slowly, he turned his head. His hood slipped back, just enough for me to see the side of his face. His skin was pale, clammy, dark circles around his eyes that were too wide, too focused, and his mouth was stretched into a thin, tight smile that never touched his eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. He kept staring at me, that smile twitching, his gaze unblinking, and then, just as slowly as he turned, he faced forward again, back to his plate, back to that horrible stillness. I swallowed and forced myself to breathe. "Can I get my check?" I said, my voice shaking. The waitress finally looked at me. Her eyes were wide, her jaw tight. She shook her head once, just a tiny, subtle movement. Then she mouthed 2 words, "Not yet." I couldn't understand why. I felt trapped, cornered. The man still hadn't moved, still hadn't touched his food. I looked at the door. It felt a million miles away. "Go to the bathroom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now." I didn't think. I just got up and walked as calmly as I could to the bathroom at the back of the diner. I didn't look at the man. I didn't look at the waitress. Once inside, I locked the door and pulled out my phone. I had no service. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering like a dying bulb. I leaned against the sink, heart pounding, trying to figure out what to do. Then the door handle rattled, softly at first, then harder. I backed away, breathing fast. "Occupied," I said, my voice cracking. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then a voice, muffled through the door, too close, too calm. "Are you scared of me now?" I felt tears stinging my eyes. My chest hurt. I waited, counted the seconds, listened for footsteps. Nothing. After what felt like an eternity, I finally opened the door. The diner was empty. The waitress was gone. The TV was off. The clock was stopped. And the man was sitting in my booth. His hood was down now. His eyes were open too wide, too bright, too hungry. And his mouth still twisted into that awful, unblinking smile. My mother died 2 weeks ago. The house was left to me. It was the one I grew up in, the one I hadn't been inside for years. We didn't have a good relationship. Things got worse after my dad died when I was 16. Mum changed, grew cold, distant. Eventually, we stopped speaking. But now it was mine. It was old and falling apart, the kind of place you'd see in a ghost story. 2 stories, peeling paint, sagging room. The air inside was stale and heavy, like no one had opened a window in years. I'd only planned to stay a night or 2, pack up some of her things, sort through the junk, maybe find a few things worth keeping. The first night was uneventful, just silence and dust, the kind of quiet that gets under your skin. But the second night was different. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it. A soft, slow creak from the room upstairs, Mum's room. I sat up, listening. The house was old, full of settling beams and drafty windows. But this sound wasn't random. It was slow, steady, creaking, like the sound of someone rocking back and forth in a chair. I told myself it was just the wind, just the house shifting, but it went on for hours. The next morning, I went upstairs. The room was exactly as she'd left it. The bed unmade, clothes draped over the chair, the curtains drawn tight. It was suffocating in there. The air smelled stale, like sweat and mothballs. And in the centre of the room was an old rocking chair. I'd forgotten about it. Dark wood, scuffed and worn, with clawed feet that dug into the wooden floor. It was facing the window, the way she always kept it. I touched it, feeling the worn wood under my fingers. The seat was warm. I pulled my hand back, my chest felt tight. Maybe it was the sun, maybe it was nothing, but it felt like someone had been sitting there. That night, it started again. I was laying in bed, eyes closed, when the creaking started. Slow, deliberate, back and forth, back and forth. I couldn't breathe. I just lay there, eyes shut, pretending I didn't hear it. The next morning, I went back upstairs. The rocking chair had moved. It was no longer facing the window. It was facing the door. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe I'd bumped it when I was up there. Maybe the floor was uneven. Maybe. I grabbed the chair and pushed it back to the window. It was heavier than I remembered, the wood cold and solid under my hands. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, half expecting it to move again. It didn't. That night, the creaking was louder, closer. I could hear it echoing through the floorboards, a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to seep into my bones. I got up, grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, and headed for the stairs. Halfway up, the creaking stopped. I stood there, flashlight beam shaking, staring at the door to her room. The door was open, but I'd closed it that morning. The air was thick, heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. I forced myself to step inside. The room was dark, shadows stretching across the walls like reaching hands. The rocking chair was facing me. The flashlight flickered, and for a split second I thought I saw someone sitting in it. Just a shape, a dark, slumped figure, its head bowed, hands resting on the armrests. The light steadied, and the chair was empty. I couldn't do it anymore. I turned and ran downstairs, slamming the door behind me. I couldn't sleep at all. I just sat in the living room, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the creaking to start again. But it didn't. The next day, I called my cousin to ask if she'd come and stay with me. She didn't hesitate, just said yes. We hadn't seen each other in years, but she must have heard the panic in my voice. When she got there, I told her everything. The noises, the chair, the feeling that someone was still in that room. She listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I was done, she said, "You didn't know, did you?" "Know what?" She looked at me like she was about to tell me something awful. "A few months ago, your mum started acting strange," she said. She'd tell the neighbours that she wasn't alone, that someone was sitting in her room watching her. My stomach dropped. Who? She wouldn't say, but they said she talked to it, sat in the rocking chair all night, whispering to it. I shook my head. I don't believe that, but I did. That night, I told my cousin to sleep in my room while I took the couch. She agreed without question. At around 3 a.m, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They were coming from upstairs. Then the creaking started again. I sat up. It wasn't the rocking chair. It was the bed. My bed. I ran up the stairs, nearly tripping in the dark. I threw open the door, and there she was. My cousin was sitting up in bed, staring at the rocking chair. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. I followed her gaze. The chair was rocking, back and forth, back and forth. There was no one on it. I grabbed her, and we ran downstairs, slamming the door behind us. Neither of us spoke. We left the next morning. I locked the door and threw the key down the storm drain. I couldn't stand the thought of anyone else going inside. A few days later, my cousin called me. "I can't stop hearing it," she said. "That sound." "What sound?" "The creaking," she whispered, back and forth. I hung up and blocked her number. I didn't want to know. But last night, as I was laying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard it again. A slow, steady creaking. Not upstairs, but in the room right next to mine. It started after I visited that estate sale. It was one of those last-minute things. A friend of mine had seen it advertised online and asked if I wanted to tag along. The house was maybe 20 minutes outside of town, tucked behind a row of trees on a narrow road I'd never noticed before. Big old colonial-style place, clearly hadn't been lived in for a while. The yard was overgrown, the driveway cracked with weeds. The people running the sale weren't family, just a company hired to clear everything out. Inside, the air was heavy with that dry paper and wood smell. The house was packed, shelves of books, faded photographs, old furniture. Nothing really caught my eye until we got to the upstairs hall. That's where I saw the mirror. It was small, about the size of a bathroom cabinet, with an old wooden frame carved into this twisting fine design. It was nailed to the wall behind 2 doors, just hanging there like it belonged. But what caught my attention was what I saw in it. Not a reflection, not exactly. I was looking straight at it, but the image seemed just slightly off, like a delay, maybe half a second behind real time. When I raised my hand, the reflection followed, just a beat too slow. I mentioned it to the guy running the sale. He said the mirror wasn't even for sale, it was part of the house. Still, I stared at it for ages. That night, after we got back, I started to feel weird. Not sick, just watched. My house is small, 1 story, 2 bedrooms, nothing fancy. I live alone, so I know every creak, every draft, every flickering light. But that night, things felt different. The air in the hallway was colder, heavier. When I passed the mirror above my entryway, one I'd walked by 100 times, I thought, just for a second, I saw someone else in it. Not me, not a stranger either, just someone wrong, shorter than me, standing still while I walked. When I turned around, no one was there. I didn't sleep well. The next few days, it got worse. Doors that I knew I'd shut would be open when I came back. My bathroom mirror fogged up even when I hadn't taken a shower. I started seeing smudges on the windows, like someone had pressed their hands against the glass from the inside. Once, while brushing my teeth, I saw movement in the corner of the bathroom mirror. I turned fast, nothing. But in the glass, just for a flash, there was a figure standing in the hallway behind me. Dark, motionless, wrong. I started sleeping with my bedroom door shut and locked. Then, 2 nights later, I woke up at 2:43 a.m. The room was pitch black, no street light through the blinds. My digital clock was off. I sat up and listened. I heard the floor creak outside my door, just once. Then another creak, closer. Then the soft sound of something brushing against the wood, like a hand gliding along the wall. No footsteps, just slow movement. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Then I heard a breath, low and steady, right outside the door. Not panicked, not rushed, just calm, like someone was listening to me breathe and trying to match it. I stayed perfectly still. Eventually, the sound stopped. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I found something on the floor outside my door. A long, thin splinter of wood, exactly like the frame of the mirror from the estate sale. I never touched it. I started researching the house. Turns out, the original owner, a woman named Margaret Holloway, had lived there alone for almost all of her life. Never married, no children. She'd been a recluse, according to a few scattered posts I'd found. There were rumours, not confirmed, just internet lore, that she'd believed something had attached itself to her through a mirror, that she'd nailed all the reflective glass in the house to the walls so it couldn't follow her. She died in the house, alone. I went back to see if the mirror was still there. It was, only this time there was something different. The reflection wasn't delayed anymore. But when I stepped in front of it, I didn't see myself. I saw my hallway, my own hallway, as if I was looking at it from the other side. And in the mirror, at the very edge of the frame, something moved. A pale shape, crawling along the wall, not walking, crawling. I backed away. I haven't gone near a mirror since, not even the rear view one in my car. I've started covering them all at night, just in case. But every now and then, especially after dark, I catch a flash of movement, not in the mirrors, but out the corner of my eye, and always in the same place, just behind me. Well, that concludes today's Scary Reddit stories. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this creepy journey, don't forget to like and subscribe. Please also leave your own spooky experiences below